and welcome to the Spinal Cord Injury Forum. My name is Jeannie Hoffman. I'm a clinical psychologist in the Department of Rehabilitation Medicine and the director of the Northwest Regional Spinal Cord Injury System here at the University of Washington. We are so grateful to welcome our guests tonight. As you'll notice, we are in times of COVID and we use words like pods, and so the reason they're able to sit so close together is they are in the same pod as they work together. We're pleased to welcome Barry Long and Tom Minty from Able Environments, and they're going to be presenting tonight on strategies on buying and selling accessible homes. And so I'll turn things over to Tom and Barry. Thanks for joining us.
Great, thank you. Thank you. So I'll just start from the beginning with how we got into this. And I actually had a public speaking company, and I've been doing public speaking for many, many years. And I did a keynote for Marketplace Sotheby's International Realty. It was their annual sales conference. And in the keynote, maybe made a little bit of fun of the fact that, you know, they're Sotheby's and the biggest and the best in the world. And they accessibility was really challenging and pretty much sucked for people in wheelchairs to find and sell and homes that are accessible. So I challenged them and said, why don't you guys fix it? Just kind of joking. And about a month later, they took me out to lunch and said, you're right. We've done some homework, and accessibility is very, very challenging for people who are looking for accessible homes in real estate. And we've searched the country, is what they told me, and we found one realtor in the country that specializes in the ADA. And they wanted me to take a look at this person to figure out what they were doing. So anyhow, we pulled open the computer, and I looked at it, and I started laughing. And they went, well, what's so funny? I said, well, this person lives in Ada, Oklahoma. It's spelled ADA. It had absolutely nothing to do with accessibility, and there wasn't anybody. So they said, you need to come in and help us do this. And I went, no way, my wife would kill me if I started a new career now. But you know, they made a compelling offer, and they actually paid for me to go get my real estate license with the goal of seeing what I could do to add accessibility to real estate and learn how the system worked. So I started going to meetings to learn what accessibility really meant. And in one of those meetings, someone said, you need to meet this guy, Tom Minty. He's been working on this project for a long time, and he wants to make accessibility, you know, available for everybody in real estate as well. So I tried to find this guy. I found a phone number and was surprised that his phone number was 425 because I figured I was calling Kansas. And I called him up and said, hey, you don't know who I am, but this is what I'm doing. And he said, oh my gosh, that's what I want to do too. And I said, you know, I live in this little town called Woodinville. And he said, so do I. So we went down to Mullbox and met at the cafe there, and we both put everything that we had on the table and started a partnership, and literally that moment pretty much created, you know, Able Environments, which is something Tom had been working on for a while to try and change the way real estate worked so it was more accessible for people.
And how I got into it was kind of a stumble as well. When I first started in real estate 17 years ago, I had a dear friend who had multiple sclerosis. And she just asked me offhand, you know, if I ever found any accessible housing. And I said, well, I don't know, you know. So I looked at the MLS, and there was a little button called Disabled Access. So I started looking at those houses and found that nobody knew what that meant. I mean, it may have a level entry sliding glass door in the basement of the house, and that's the only room you could get into. And it's pretty much stayed that way for about the last 17 years until Barry and I really synergized and decided to make a big change.
Yeah, so what we found was that all real estate is data, and real estate in general. And it's, you know, how many bedrooms, what's the location, what's the square footage, you know, all of that information is data. And that data then lives in what's called the multiple listing services. And there's multiple listing services all over the whole country. And those MLSs house the data that then allows somebody to go find what it is that they're looking for or sell what they have. And what we found was that the data wasn't available for accessibility. So in Tom's example, it would say disabled access, which means basically nothing. It was like saying it was green. Well, what shade of green? So what we did was we went in and we figured out a way to try and make accessibility available in the database. But what we found was that accessibility is so relative that trying to pick one specific channel just wasn't going to work, because everybody's experience and what they need for accessibility was different. So what we did was we broke down a piece of property by basically by the segments of the property. So for example, approach. You know, is this approach quote unquote accessible? Is the entrance accessible? Is the living space accessible? Is the bedroom or the bathroom or the utility? So we broke a piece of property down into different sections, and then we asked ourselves, well, what does accessibility mean? And we had some soul searching to figure out what accessibility really meant, because it is so relative that for me it's different than for somebody with a walker or somebody with a prosthetic or somebody with with a brain injury or somebody with a power wheelchair. So and this is where we found that the other MLSs that had actually tried to do this around the country had failed, was that they didn't really look at the big picture of what accessibility means. They just assumed wheelchair and they left it at that. So we've actually even gotten some heat when we post a house that's accessible and someone says, well, I can't get into it. Well, it's not necessarily just for you.
Yeah.
It's for the whole idea of accessibility. So we broke accessibility down, we broke the properties down, and then we came up with a system that allows a realtor to then take a piece of the property, describe what accessibility means for that piece of property, and then they can go through the entire property. And now somebody, once they put that into the database, then somebody else can go in and find it. So
one of the challenges we had early on too was that everybody was doing their own thing around the country. So the process for us lasted over a year actually in trying to get this established, because we were trying to work with the Real Estate Standards Organization, which has the taxonomy of what these words are. In fact, we had input into what they called things that we didn't agree with. So we came up with a standard set of terms that any multiple listing service throughout the country can use, which was really part of our goal as well, is to really disseminate this information.
So right now, the state of Washington is the only place, well, there's 2 states that have just followed suit, but we're the first state that now a realtor can go in when they're listing a piece of property and they can say that this home has specific aspects of accessibility. And then that gets published out, so then another realtor who's looking for accessibility can find it. And we broke the search criteria down by approach, entrance, bathroom, bedroom, living space, utility, one for hearing and vision, one for smart technology, and then we have an other now, but we're actually removing that. So the whole property now can get broken down, and then people can actually get into what is it that they really need when it comes to accessibility. Now, right now, the state of Washington and I believe Iowa and there's one other are the only places that a realtor can go in and find accessibility. It's not something that you can go onto any of the big real estate sites yet and find, but that's what we're working on later. And then once we got that established in Washington, then it's about education. And we found that once real estate, once the data is there, then it's knowing what questions to ask. And that is really where we moved into, well, how does somebody know what they need so they can then find out what it is that they want to look for when they're looking for a house? And we broke down real estate into a series of questions now. And every single person who's going to look for a home has to think about what true features they need from the accessibility side of things to then try and find the right house for them.
We actually, on top of the 10 criteria that we had, we created a supplement that went along with that went into details. We would ask people, okay, if it's got accessible hallways, how wide are the hallways? Can you measure the distance on it? How wide are the doorways? And it was actually encouraging. Actually, one of the first people that we had use that form, the realtor actually sent the supplement form to her clients, and they didn't even look at the multiple listing. They just looked at the supplement sheet and said, this is what we need for this and this, and they were ecstatic that they could find a house that way.
Yeah, it's funny. I'm working with clients now that have different disabilities, of asking people how they move. For me, how do you get on and off of a toilet? Do you do it on the left or do you do it on the right? Once you get into the house, what's your turning radius? Where do you need to move? How do you need to move? What aspects of the house do you use? And so when I first started this, and I'm sure there's somebody who's on the video right now that's going to giggle at this, I took a group of quadriplegics out to lunch at the same time, and that's very dangerous to do. They're crazy. They have a lot of fun, and they're very sarcastic. So I asked them, well, hey, you guys, I'm a para, and I want to know what aspects of real estate and accessibility you're looking for. And I thought I was going to get this standard, we're looking for a ranch home that has this and that, and I got 5 different sets of answers. Yeah. And one of the answers was, I want to be able to go into every single inch of my home because I have young children, or I'm going to, and even though I can't specifically help them do the laundry, I want to be able to walk them through it and talk them through it, or walk them through, it's not a good term, but talk them through it, how to do it. So I want to be able to access everything in my house. Well, one of the other guys said, I want a 3-story house. I went, you want a 3-story house? He said, yeah. He said, I've got caregivers that come and stay with me all the time, and when they're not in my space, I want them out of my space. And my mom and my parents and family come over sometimes, and I really don't want them in my space either. So we'll let my family go downstairs because they can all walk downstairs. I'll let my caregivers go upstairs because they can walk upstairs. And everything on the main level is going to be totally accessible for me. And oh my gosh, this is fantastic. I'm looking for a 3-story house for a quadriplegic. When who would have even thought about that? So by asking the right questions of, well, how it is that you move and what is it that you really truly need, then that allows you to then start looking at real estate like everybody does and put that same series of questions in front of you. Where are you looking to move? What does your transportation need to be in the area that you're moving? Because does the access bus, which only goes from 1 mile to where the main line is, does it actually come to where you live? What's the school district like, and what are the accessibility aspects of the school district that you like? So it's just adding another set of criteria to the same things everybody asks in real estate. Right. And now we have the supplements for accessibility that allow all of us to ask those questions as well. So then when you do go into the search, you're looking for a 3-bedroom, 2-bath in this school district, in this city, and it needs to have these accessibility features. So now those homes are being listed, so it gives somebody something to look for. And it's been a lot of fun actually learning and watching the process, because there is a stereotype there that everybody who's looking for accessibility is looking for a ranch home. And the very first home that I went and looked at when I first started this was in my neighborhood. And sweet, it is a ranch home. It's right down the street. And she listed that it had disabled access before Tom and I actually got going what was going. So I went down and I looked at the house, and it was 3 steps in the front, 3 steps in the back, and 3 steps in the garage. So I called her and said, hey, I've got a question for you. You've got listed that this home has disabled access. She said, yes, it's a ranch. Oh, and I know it's a ranch, but I'm sitting in the driveway in my wheelchair right now, and I can't figure out how to get in the house. And she went, oh, explanative. And then she went, and when I went back into the system about 3 minutes later, the disabled access button had been taken off, because she was just assuming that because it was a ranch, it was accessible. And it was an interesting learning experience for us to get in and have to first educate ourselves to what accessibility was, which I go back, it's just so relative, and then bring that down to where the majority of people were going to be benefiting from what it was that we were doing. And it's fun. I was just on the phone today with our local MLS, and they're actually going to be updating what we've done, because we've found the way that people use it and the way that realtors use it, and they're updating it now to make it more accessible, and they're going to change the smart technology, because realtors have been putting that they have an Alexa in the home. Yeah. And that's smart technology. And we're like, well, does Alexa talk to the lights, and can they hook it up from their phone? And the broker's like, what are you talking about? It's like, no, click, unbutton, uncheck.
I can order groceries.
Yeah, right, exactly, yeah. So it's the whole process of figuring out what questions to ask has really led us into a cool place where we're learning a lot now. We just actually were meeting with the Parkinson's Foundation, because those who have Parkinson's have a different set of criteria that we've looked at before in terms of what kinds of things they're going to be looking for as they get older and are looking for accessibility. So we're now meeting with them to find out, well, how can we add that to our database? With the goal of, it's a continuously growing process and machine. And this morning, our MLS basically gave Tom and I permission, which he doesn't know yet, that we can actually give the documentation that we have. Any MLS in the country can come to us, and they have permission to use any of it verbatim as it's written, because they want to share it with the rest of the country as well. So it's fun.
Which is one of our objectives.
Exactly, yeah.
And one of our biggest challenges, we'll talk more about this a little bit later in the program, but the biggest challenge for Barry and I right now is educating the real estate community, because now they've got this great forum with some accessibility features, and lo and behold, a house may have an accessible bathroom on the second floor. You know, that's just awesome.
Yeah.
So we clearly need to get down to the basics with people and say, you know, think this through. You know, is that really accessible?
And it starts again with us, the users, the people that are looking to buy a house. And on the slide, you know, I've got, well, what are your needs and what are your wants? Because they're different. What are the things that you absolutely need when it comes to trying to find an accessible home? And that's the questions that you need to answer. You know, what do your bathroom duties look like in the day? What kind of a bedroom do you need? And you know, for somebody who needs a ceiling lift or a Hoyer lift, or somebody who needs to be able to access certain things, and what are the needs? And you start there. And that's for anybody who's looking for a house, but especially when you're looking for a house that's got accessibility features, because looking inside of what are those needs that you have and what are those needs that you might have in the future. And that's something that's really hard, especially with a progressive, you know, situation where somebody's got Parkinson's, and it's going to get worse. It might get worse, probably will. So think 4 or 5 years ahead, so you're not getting yourself ready for the walker when actually you're going to need the wheelchair later. So what are those true needs that you've got? And then you go to the wants, because it leads to the next slide of, you know, well, then we figure out what features we're going to be looking for in your home. But we're also going to be figuring out what aspects we're looking for in the home to make sure that we can have those features in the home. And it leads to one of the questions, and one of the first questions that we've dealt with clients that come to us that are in a situation where they need accessibility. It's, can they make their current home accessible, or do they need to buy a new home? The first thing we want to do is figure out how they can stay where they're at, if they like where they're at. Right. And that ends up you know, being it's funny because they're like, well, you're just, you know, don't you guys want to buy us a new house? We're like, no, we want you to live in a house that's accessible. We don't really care whether we buy or sell. It's more of, what do we need to do? So asking again those questions of, well, do you need to buy a new house, or can we remodel your house? So what does your current house look like? Go back to those questions of needs and wants. What features do you need? And then we need to take a look at the structure of your current home to see what the bones look like.
Interesting statistically, too, is that the average age of a house in the United States right now is 74 years old. And less than 2%, I think it's about 1.5% of the houses that exist in the United States are wheelchair accessible. So it's, if you look at houses that were built in 1974, which is the average age of those houses, split level houses were very popular. They were coming in. A lot of the ranch houses, like Barry was talking about, they say, I'm looking for a single level house. Well, that's great, except, you know, houses were built small in the 60s, in the 50s. They usually had 3 bedrooms and 1 bathroom. And the halls were, you know, 30 inches wide, and the doors were 28 inches. And it's very difficult to go down a hall in a wheelchair if you can, and then at least, you know, get into a bedroom or a bathroom. So just because it has a single floor doesn't mean that it's going to be good, and it doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be adaptable.
That's right. So looking at the bones first. And what we've found now is that getting architects involved or a designer involved, an accessibility specialist right from the beginning, actually before they even talk to us. And it's been fun that we've started to partner up with some people that they specialize in accessibility. And they come and ask us, well, what shall we do? And the first thing we want to do is get somebody to go look at their house to see whether it's logistically appropriate, financially, or even structurally to stay in the home that they're in. And if it is, well, then great. Then, you know, we're out of the equation and they get to go remodel their house and stay there. And if not, then we figure out what's next. So that those questions, you know, are become really important in the beginning of, how long is this your forever home? What are the costs of remodeling versus the cost versus selling and buying something new? You know, and asking those questions to figure out, well, what's the most appropriate thing to do for the current situation you're in and the situation that you're going to be in 5, 10 years. If you're only going to be there for a couple of years, you know, we put it together as best we can and figure out what your next step is. If this could be your forever home, then, you know, we're going to look at, you know, spending a little bit more money because it might be cheaper for you to stay than to move. So, you know, looking at the house itself. And then again, bringing in, it's been so fun for us to work with the architects and the designers that we've got, because they'll walk into a room and they'll start looking at, well, moving this wall and taking the bathroom and turning it into the laundry room and then moving this over here. And both Tom and I are like, wow, this is so awesome. You get to stay in your home because your kids are already going to the school that's here, and everything that you've done gets to stay. And the architects we've worked with have got some really neat, fun things that they've been working on. And I couldn't believe that I even said this, but I'm like, wow, accessibility can be sexy. You know, that some of the design aspects of some of these houses are just absolutely fantastic. And it doesn't have to be super expensive to be luxurious. You know, that one of the houses the first one that I saw when we got into this, I went into the house and it was one of the most beautiful houses I've ever been in. The accessibility was hidden. You didn't see it. It was super subtle, but it was all there. So I took a bunch of realtors from my office in, went, all right, everybody tell me where the accessibility is in this house. And a couple of them figured out that I could roll underneath this or I could move underneath that. They didn't notice that the hallways were an extra 1.5 feet. They didn't notice that all the corners in the house had been rounded. So there was no digging your wheels in as you're turning corners. And by the time we left, everybody in there, I went, okay, let's go around and look at the accessibility. 85% of it, not one person even began to look at, because they weren't thinking about it from accessibility. They're thinking about it from luxury, and the house was luxurious.
One of the first houses that I showed too was built in 1989, but it was built for a wealthy family in the Snohomish County area. And one of the daughters was the home and garden editor for the San Francisco Chronicle. So they built this house for mom and dad as they got older. And she tried to incorporate everything she knew about universal design at the time. And the house was gorgeous. So I had an invitational open house where I invited people and realtors to come through the house. And there was a North Seattle Community College class. The teacher gave them extra credit to come through the house. And so one gal came, and I said, look around, come back and ask any questions. And she was gone for about a half an hour as other people were coming and going. And she came up to me and she said, I don't get it. She goes, what am I looking for? You know, all I see is this house with a gorgeous view of the Sound. And I went, you found it. I go, that's exactly what it is. In fact, one of the things that I had to do to the house was I did a walking guide. So I put numbers on features all around the house, and people had a walking guide so they could come up with and see what number 3 was and what the feature was and what the benefit was. So, I mean, that's really what we're trying to work with people to do, is say this, you know, accessibility should be transparent. It should be more than 1.5% of the houses, you know, because like we said, that's for other people. Well, we're all other people, you know. In a split second, we can all be there. So,
oh, one of the things that's interesting is, I don't know who's gone into the hotel room that is extra wide and the bathroom is huge and the door is, you know, time and a half the size. And like, this is awesome. You know, who gets this room? And it's the European, you know, bathroom, but it's actually just universally designed. You know, and so you're better than I am. What's the universal design? What's the motto? It's for more, for everybody.
yeah,
You know it. I always forget it.
usable by the greatest number of people to the greatest extent, regardless of ability.
Which just sums it up, you know, when it comes right down to it. Because what we're finding that it really starts with universal design. And accessibility is just a subset of that, even though that's what we really focused on when we got into it, just because of the database and what we needed to do. But it's really just universal design.
I wrote a program several years ago called The Economics of Design. And that was one of the things that I had talked about in there, is that, you know, there are costs associated with doing these things, doing them up front. The cost is, you know, for a door, say a wider door, it's about $2 a door to put it in wider when you build the house, as versus $700 or $800 to modify that later on. And there's some things that you can't modify. So we're really trying to work with the builders and the architects to say, in fact, during the recession, when they were slowing down, but there were still people building houses, I used to go to some of the new developments and say, if you'll put 1% of your houses into universal design, I'll pre-sell them for you. You don't even have to market them. But they weren't interested because, you know, margin's a margin, and they can keep making the same old thing over and over again, and people buy it. So we're really trying to stress too that people speak with their pocketbooks. You know, economics drives it.
It's been interesting because Trilogy is one of the local 55 and over communities. Just go drive through Trilogy sometime and tell me how many homes you see that don't have a step to get in. The only ones that have been done are because somebody else actually went after the fact and put a ramp up. Even in those communities, people weren't thinking about it, and every single home has a step.
Yeah,
or
and
two.
actually, I gave a program there too, and I talked to the people, and some of them said that they actually tried to work with Shea Homes, is who built it, said, you know, we want a level entry, and they go, well, you know, that's not what our plan does, so they didn't do it. But a lot of builders too are looking at things like that, and they're going, well, I think the percentage of what people make on remodels for upgrades or, you know, modifications to plans is a phenomenal percentage of the total cost. So they can make money by selling these as upgrades, and unfortunately,
Yeah, it ends up being that.
yeah.
So, you know, kick in just so, I know I saw some of the questions before that, you know, people want to know, well, when it comes to buying, how do you find an accessible home? So I want to give a little bit of terminology that Tom and I have played around with, and there's accessible, and then there's adaptable, and then there's visitable. And accessible is that up until recently, you got lucky. You know, you found a house that's perfectly accessible for whatever the features are that you need for accessibility, and that you can just turnkey and you go in and it's accessible. Then there's adaptable, which is what we were talking about with the bones, that the bones of the house allow you to, with somewhat ease, you know, without having to knock the whole house down, you can actually make that home adaptable, and then it will become accessible for whatever your needs are. And then visitable, and I love visitable because visitable is that you've got somebody who you know who might be coming over. It could be grandma, it could be the mother-in-law, it could be your friend, and that you've got a house that you want them to be able to get in and use the bathroom. And my dad's is a perfect example. I can get into his place, I can get to the bathroom and the living area and the kitchen, and all the bedrooms are where I can't get to him because he really doesn't want me to stay. So, you know, it's it's looking at, well, what are you looking for when you want to buy a house? And people look for accessible, though until recently, there haven't been a lot of accessible homes on the market, even though there are more now because of what we've been working on. But as we slowly start getting more accessible homes in the market, people are really going to more than anything, have to be looking for adaptable homes. You know, and that's where going back to those questions of figuring out, well, what is it that you need? What do you want? And then how easily is it to adapt this style of home to give you those features that you want?
You know, and from a real estate perspective too, even with any of our clients, you know, we always tell them that there is no such thing as a 100% house. You know, I mean, if you could find 85% of what you want, that's good. That's really great. And even people that have built their own house, you know, I said, I'm going to design this the way I want it. I've talked to them all, and they'll go, you know, I wished we would have done this differently because I just don't like it. It's the same thing when we get people that say, with some of the featured homes we put on our website, they go, well, that's not accessible, it's got steps up to the front. And we're going, yeah, but that's something that can be adapted easily. So it's not 100%. And 100%, again, like Barry said earlier, is subjective anyway. 100% for John is not going to be 100% for Bob, even though they both may be paraplegic. You know, they have completely different needs.
Yeah, so it comes down to the feature requirements again, where I keep coming back to those questions. You know, figuring out exactly what it is that you need then gives the realtor that you're working with, which we'll talk about in a little bit, the right ammunition and fodder to be able to go in and find that adaptable home. Again, we've gotten lucky, and a couple of them you click the button and go, man, that home is exactly, that's accessible, and you know, it's like the pair of pants you buy that you don't have to hem at all. You know,
Yeah.
it just fit, and that never happens online. So, you know, I mean, people are buying houses online now. They're looking and they're doing all the photos, and especially with COVID, and you know, we're doing lots of videos and some other things. Again, we'll talk about it in a little bit, but figuring out what those feature requirements are, and knowing that you're not going to find an accessible home, and kind of getting that out of your head is really important, because it gets in the way. Because then you stop, oh, well, that one's not accessible. Well, let's just take a look. You know, I had a client who actually was interested. He was a double amputee. And he's like, Barry, no offense, but I don't like people seeing me in my wheelchair. And I'm like, it's all right, you know, I do. You know, so, but the thing was, in public, he walked. He has his 2 prosthetic legs. So he actually walked up the 3 steps in his house. But as soon as he got in the house, it was totally wheelchair accessible, because he would take off his legs and he would jump in his chair, and his wheelchair ended up being how he would move around in his house. So people are like, well, this isn't an accessible home. It's got 4 steps to get into it. Well, easy enough to adapt. It's perfectly accessible for him, but not for somebody else. So, getting that, I'm going to find the perfect house out of the way, and then figuring out, well, what is the adaptability? And with friends, that the visitability becomes more and more important, where, my brother's looking for a place, and he's like, dude, I want you to come, but I don't want you to stay. So, hey, we'll get a place that's visitable, or the mother-in-law, or, these other ors that fit into that. It doesn't have to be perfectly accessible, as long as the accessibility features and the requirements that you need are there.
And actually, one of the things that's interesting as a byproduct of the COVID virus is that real estate has adapted and changed quite a bit. And video has become very important.
Mm-hmm.
And for Barry and I, it's really an asset because we can use things like Matterport, which allow you to do a 3D walk through the house. And we're playing with now actually adding features, pointing out things that are accessible through the house for universal design. Or doing things like Facebook Live, where you can actually walk through the house and take a look at it. So it gives people that have problems, can't just jump in a car and drive out there and take a look at the house. They can look at it remotely, and if it's something that's close to what they're looking for, then we can go to that next step of actually trying to go out there. But video's been a great asset and a silver lining in this dark cloud.
Yeah, and there are some houses that aren't going to be accessible until you actually renovate them. So, being able to use video like that has been great. We've had a couple of people that have, literally bought houses that they've never actually been in physically, but with, the technology that's out there, they've been able to get through and see it. And what Tom and I have done now is, because in the state of Washington, realtors can list homes, which we'll talk about next, that have accessibility features, and we look at them every single day. So we see every single accessible home that's in the state of Washington that gets listed. And then we go through those and vet them. Most of them are relatively honest in their accessibility features. There may be a fudging here or there. So what we've been doing is we're the first ones ever to get this permission, but we've been getting permission from brokerages all over the state of Washington. And normally they keep all of their stuff like this and they don't want you to do it. But Tom and I have been getting permission from realtors all over the state to list their homes on our site. So we've been going through, on pretty much a weekly basis now and trying to find just a varied, style and number of accessible homes that are out there, because there hasn't been a place that somebody can go, and you can't go to the big real estate companies and just find it yet, because they're not pulling the data, the accessibility data yet from the databases. So
that's one of the things that we're really trying to do as well as we talk to other organizations. People that have spent a lot of money building or modifying their house for adaptability like to know that somebody that can use those features is actually going to appreciate them. In fact, I've sold houses that have been completely accessible, and somebody will buy the house and they'll tear all those off.
yeah.
And it just makes me cry. But we really want to be able to get the people that need the house together with the people that have the house and find those. Like I said, less than 1.5% of the houses in the inventory in the United States are accessible. Well, if you've got one, let's find somebody that can use it.
And one of the things that's been challenging for us, which is so funny, is that we're actually pushing up against the Fair Housing Act and how we advertise for accessible homes, because we're a protected, well, I'm a protected class.
I'm too.
That's right.
I'm old.
So we're, so being a protected class, we can't actually advertise in certain ways specifically to people with disabilities, because we're going against the Fair Housing Act and we could lose our licenses for that. So we've actually had conversations with the Department of Licensing, because here we are targeting the protected class that we're trying to protect to get them the house that they need. That's what we do. And we've been going up against this push of making sure that we're actually doing it legally. So by getting permission from the realtors that have listings that are accessible, and by putting them out on our site and making sure that we don't market them only to people with disabilities, it gets us around not getting in trouble for targeting a protected class, which is kind of what we're doing. But in this case, but I won't tell anybody. So it's been an interesting challenge that we really did come up against something that was there to protect, that then stopped us from being able to go and just specifically advertise, hey, this home is for people with disabilities and it's got accessibility. Well, we can't say that. So
one of the things that we're fighting right now too is that, and one of the reasons we look at all the houses every day, I look a couple times a day, I know Barry does as well, and put houses that have potential in a category that we'll look at later. But for a lot of realtors, there's a stigma associated with a handicapped house. And they'll go to great lengths not to mention anything about that. Yeah. And so we can kind of look through the veil and try to find out when a house has potential. And like we said, having the additional features in the MLS now, a lot of people will put those features in because it's quick, but when they find out that they have to fill out a supplement form as well, they'll just take it off, and they won't advertise it anymore. So we have a lot of education to do in our own organization to make sure that realtors represent everybody's needs.
Well, and it's a perfect segue, because one of the problems that Tom just mentioned was that accessibility was seen as a negative and a devaluation of a home. And I don't know how many times my dad would say, well, when we sell this house, now that it's got all these handicap things in it, it's going to be hard to find a buyer. We're going to have to sell it to one of the old folks' homes that has people that live there, and and not stereotyping my dad, but that was just the stigma of an accountant. And there was no way to value accessibility, because the stereotype and the stigma was that accessibility meant a crappy ramp that somebody bought at Home Depot and 6 bags of cement that Uncle Bill came over and put a ramp out front. And that was accessibility, with linoleum and a stale white tile bathroom. So we've had to try and educate the realtors world and the real estate world that, well, accessibility can be sexy and it can be luxurious, and it's not what it used to be. And now, for the first time, because of the way that the database works, every single checkbox in the database has a value to it when it comes to real estate. So if you're looking at 2 homes and one has 2 bedrooms and one has 3 bedrooms, the 3-bedroom home has more value if they're sitting next to each other because of that extra checkbox. And now, for the first time, accessibility actually has value, especially the fact that 10,000 baby boomers are turning 65 every day for the next 10 or 12 years. 1 in 5 people have some kind of a mobility need and challenge in this country, that the accessibility is now, for the very first time, starting to gain value.
Yeah, that's one of the things actually we're working on in our training too, is trying to quantify that for the realtors so they can actually see the value. Like Barry said, it's like just under 20% of the population has some type of a mobility disability. But if you add to that 2 family members, 2 friends, 2 coworkers, the number becomes more like 90% of the population. I used to say, when McDonald's shows a kid in a wheelchair, they're not advertising to that kid in the wheelchair. They're advertising to mom, dad, brothers, sisters, grandma, grandpa. So it affects a lot of people.
Yeah, and value becomes an issue when you're selling a house. That as you're putting your house on the market, and right now it's such a crazy market, in the Seattle area, and I just got on a call today that the Arizona market is as crazy as ours is, and San Francisco is even crazier than ours is, and there's no inventory. Well, how do you add that extra value? Whereas, like Tom said, I've got a broker that's got a $1 million house that's beautifully designed for accessibility, and she didn't put one aspect of the accessibility into it because she didn't want to alienate all the people who weren't looking for accessibility. Not thinking about the fact that, but anyhow, state the obvious. Yeah. So again, it's part of its education, but for those who are going to sell a home that has accessibility features, that's where it gets really important to figure out what those accessibility features are and how to market those. Because we're now, again, marketing to our own audience, that somebody who understands what the value of a bathroom that's got a roll-in shower, or that might have some kind of a lift built into the ceiling lift, or these other aspects of the of the house, that has value that should be marketed. And we're looking at what terminology we can use, how we can use that terminology properly, because legally we're not actually supposed to put the word wheelchair in a listing. And we went
Speaking
through
of terminology, one of the things that's interesting is they found in studies that roll-in shower didn't have nearly as much value as a European shower. Yes. And so, European shower sells. It's like, that's okay, I can deal with that, as long as we're going to make roll-in showers.
That's right, exactly.
Let's make them sexy.
And figuring out how to market it and what terminology to use. So that's where, we kick into the importance of using a realtor. Now, obviously, Tom and I are both licensed realtors, so we push ourselves in that direction. But when somebody wants to for sale by owner, there's so many aspects of this, especially with accessibility, but just now in general with contracts and how all that works. That all day long, I'll push somebody to talk to a realtor before they try and put something on the market by themselves. You can go to the different big online companies and you can do it yourself, but especially when it comes to accessibility, just knowing how to use the system becomes really important, because the system is what allows accessibility to be publicized now. And there's a series of questions that you should be asking your realtor if somebody wants to sell their home that's got accessibility. Ask the questions of what do they know about marketing accessibility? What do they know about not marketing accessibility? What questions do they know? How do they even know that this exists in the system? Because we've talked to realtors that had no idea that these accessibility features were even in the system, and they listed a home, and Tom and I are like, how come you haven't put this? Can we put it on our site? And they're like, well, why would you want to do that? Just let us do this, So making sure that you ask your realtor, or if you're not using us, that those questions, because it becomes really important to make sure that they're taking care of you, and what needs you've got for selling that accessibility.
One of the things that's important for Barry and I too, that we've really tried to go out of the way to do, is to make sure that we have a team. That we're not just the realtors. We are just the realtors, but we also have the people that we need to have to serve the people. For example, in real estate, we are supposedly legally practicing limited law, but you can't color outside the lines. If you get outside of your expertise in an area that you're highly liable for. It's the same thing when we look at accessibility. We want to make sure that we're partnering with the designers, with the builders, with the occupational therapists, the people that have those answers, and ones that we can't answer for them. But it's part of the pie. And it's like I said, it may be that you're better off staying where you are. And that's fine for Barry and I.
Yeah. Well, and when it comes to asking questions about the realtor, and I put relocations here, because as people are moving out of this area or moving into the area, but more moving out of the area, knowing what questions to ask the realtor that you're moving to, and being able to explain to them what your needs are. And sometimes that ends up being challenging because you don't think about what your needs are. And that's why I love asking that first question is, well, what side of the wheelchair do you get on and off of the toilet from? And you see people look at me like, what are you talking about? Well, that dictates which bathroom we look at. Because if these two houses, this has the bathroom on the left, the toilet on the left side, and this has the toilet on the right side, we're going to lean towards this house because we don't have to remodel the bathroom. That's a huge question to ask and get the answer to. So when it comes to relocating, if somebody's going to move to a new area and you're dealing with a realtor that you haven't dealt with before, don't be afraid to ask those questions. And if they're not the right person, Tom and I are trying to set up a national network of realtors that we can go to in any city, anywhere in the country, and call ahead and say, hey, we're looking for somebody who, and then coach them through it. Because again, we have all the documentation now that we can share with them in terms of how our system works. So if somebody's moving and you need a realtor in a different area, let us know, because we'll be able to make the call and hopefully coach them through what they need to know.
In a lot of cases, we have those connections now.
Mm-hmm. Right. Well, people are starting to find out what we're doing, so it's been a lot of fun.
Yeah.
We're getting calls. We got a call from Kansas. A woman's son was about ready to leave the hospital, and she didn't know where to start. So I'm on the phone with Kansas Realtors Associations, and we found a realtor for them, and they got it taken care of. So it was super cool for us to be able to watch the reach.
One of the things that's exciting locally too is, with our tech industry, a lot of the push in the tech industry right now is hiring diversity. So we are getting a lot of people with disabilities that are moving into the area to work with Microsoft and some of the others. So it's exciting to be able to have something in place where we can actually help those people find what they need and not go to the great unwashed masses of realtors.
That's right. Yeah, it's been a fun project, just being able to look at all the different aspects of accessibility and how real estate kind of intertwines. We actually got a phone call from a woman whose son is autistic, and she had a whole set of criteria that she was looking for her son. And she wanted to move to the Seattle area because our school, our education system here is so much more supportive than where it was that she lived. And Tom and I looked at each other and went, oh my gosh, we didn't even think about that. So it's been fun for us to look outside of our normal, just for us, of what accessibility is, to see that there's so many different aspects of, of what we can do with this and what we're learning.
There's actually so many aspects of design. It's interesting to find out that there's things that you can do in design for Alzheimer's. How people can live better in their house because of the way you design it. And it's the same thing with autism. Interestingly, when we were looking at, I think we had asked somebody a question of what, with a hearing loss, what are you looking
Right.
for? And one of the things they said was line of sight. We want an open space because we're communicating by reading lips, and we're thinking, geez, I hadn't thought of that in terms of hearing, but that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, and I ended up going to the Washington Association of Blind Peoples, and I was talking with one of the gentlemen there, and he said that he's looking for a house that's got really flat walls because he uses echolocation to walk through the house. So if it's got lots of crevices and things like that, then it ends up screwing up his echolocation. I'm on the phone with Tom going, okay, we got a whole new aspect of this. So it's been really fun for us to see all the different things that we can learn about and get into.
Yeah.
All the different questions that we end up asking.
Every day's a learning experience.
That's right. So I think you probably got questions there because I saw one of you giggling about.
Oh, absolutely.
So.
Do I talk about this?
So how much consultation are we doing with other realtors? Is a great question because I'll let you jump in first.
Yeah, unfortunately, not enough. That's one of the things that we're trying to do is we have a clock hour class that we have approved through the state of Washington right now that we want to train realtors on so that they understand what these requirements are. And by doing that, we also have familiar names and faces that we can deal with. Like we said, for referrals for relocation, we want to be able to hook people up with people in different cities, even people in different regions. Barry and I can't necessarily cover Pierce County very effectively or Thurston County. So we want to have people up there that we are comfortable with referring. I mean, a referral is a representation of yourself, so you don't want to send somebody to somebody bad.
And along those lines, we're slowly starting to get our name out there. That just this morning, there was a realtor who had a really nice house, and I realized as I was reaching out to him to ask him if we could list it, we had already asked him before. So I went in and I realized that he wrote back and said, absolutely, I would love it. You guys can list any of my homes. You have permission. So I didn't even have to go to him. That he was already there. And we've had a couple now that have reached out to us and said, hey, how do we learn more about this? But for the most part, we're being proactive in trying to get it out there. And actually, we just partnered up with the King County Realtors, and we're going to do our clock hours class through them. So they're going to start advertising our clock hour class that realtors can get continuing education credits to come listen to us babble about it. And hopefully the more realtors are out there, then the more the word will get out that people will be able to do it.
Yeah, and I actually snuck myself into the education subcommittee for the Washington Realtors Association for this year too. So I'm subtly sliding our agenda in under there for the state. So hopefully we can make headways there.
Do Europeans really like to roll into their shower? I have absolutely no idea. It's just a marketing term.
Yeah.
I mean, really.
It's sexy. I mean, hey, it's the European
It's
thing
like
to
having
do.
somebody with a European or British accent
Yeah.
on the commercial because it gives it a little bit more posh.
Yeah.
Or panache, I guess is
Panache,
the
yeah.
right word. Panache, yeah.
Somebody's asking about whether you have a listing of the features that you've added to the MLS. Like, if
Yes.
somebody is looking for it, how do they find it?
Do we have a listing of the features? Yes, we do. We actually have, I don't think we have it on the website. Might have to put that up there.
Yeah.
If we don't. That we do. We actually have a list of the 10. The way that it works is there are the features we broke down. Each one of those is a top level feature that can actually be searched. And then underneath each one of those is about 10 or 12 other criteria that a realtor can check. So yes, it has an accessible approach. Well, what does that mean? That means that it's this level of a ramp or less, or that it's got no lip transitions. So yeah, we have, we'll post the actual search criteria as well as the extra features, and then also we can post the supplemental documentation that realtors look at to find out, well, what does this mean? So absolutely, yeah, we'll put it up on our Able Environments website. Yeah.
Yeah, the question is from an occupational therapist herself, you know, how do they specialize with people with spinal cord injuries, and they want to know how they can get involved with this because they want to work with home modifications. That's exactly what we wanted to do too. I mean, a big part of Able Environments is building these partnerships. And it's the same thing like we talked about trying to build partnerships with realtors in other cities. We want to establish those networks as well. So if we've got a realtor in Oakland, that realtor in Oakland has got connections with local occupational therapists and architects and builders as well. So yeah, if anybody, you know, if you're out of state and you have questions, don't hesitate to give us a call. And if we don't have anybody in that area, we'll see if we can find people in that area.
And actually, we've partnered up with occupational therapists here and done some speaking engagements before COVID. We partnered up with remodel specialists who specializes in universal design and accessibility. And then Tom and I brought the realtor side, and we had an occupational therapist as well. So we looked at it from 3 different perspectives of a home. Well, what does the home look like? It's the bones versus, you know, how do the bones work? Can you remodel it? The occupational therapist was looking at, can it be modified for their specific clients? And then we were looking at it, well, what's the resale value once you do modify it, or if you can't, then what are we going to do to help you? So yeah, we've already partnered up with occupational therapists because it brings a perspective in that we're not looking at. You know, I think the thing that he was telling me that really opened my eyes was that they had clients that were couch surfers. And I'd never heard that term before, that somebody who they'd had a stroke and they couldn't walk a straight line without holding on, but they didn't want to carry their cane or their walker, so they had their furniture lined up in a way that they would couch surf and hold on from a couch to a counter so they had they were looking for a home that had an open floor plan that they could put furniture in places. I'd never even thought about that. So that was a great perspective for us to see. Yeah, exactly.
Actually, another resource too, I'm one of the charter members of the Northwest Universal Design Council, and a lot of these programs we had quarterly, and I think that was one of those programs. And I think those programs are on that website. If you want to go take a look at that, it's environmentsforall.org, and it's a great website too. Yeah, the question is, a lot of new homes are being built, and they continue to build the same kind of houses without accessibility. And what's the barrier there? A lot of it is that contractors do things the way they've done them, and they don't want to do them any differently. You know, in fact, why is the outlet on the wall the height that it is? I found out that that's the height of a framing hammer. They put a hammer up there and make a mark, and that's where the outlet box goes. So there's no physical reason for why it's there, but that's the way they've always done it, and that's the way they're going to keep doing it. So it's hard to make them make that change, but that's one of the things that we're working with like Master Builders Association, to try to really emphasize the fact that there's a market out there for this stuff, and they need to realize. In fact, if you look at kitchen and bath design news, half the new appliances that are coming out and they're universally designed. So I mean, those companies that build the plumbing fixtures and the appliances have got multi-million-dollar research firms, so you know what they're looking at. If a local construction company could figure out that, then they might start beating the crowd.
Well, and one of the things that we need to keep in mind with this, and I learned right up front, is that the ADA is for public use. And then when you get into family and condos and apartments, things like that, then you kick into the Fair Housing Act. So then the Fair Housing Act says that a certain percentage of units in a condo unit have to be accessible based on one of the titles. But in residential real estate, there are no guidelines. So, and I don't necessarily think that there should be specific guidelines that tell a builder you have to make a certain percentage of your homes accessible, because the property might not allow for that. But with, just knowing that and educating them to the extra value that's there, and now we're hoping that with the database allowing them to actually advertise accessibility, it's like Tom said earlier, we could pre-sell it because there aren't any out there. That's part of that educational process that I think with time, but this is one of those that we are the voice. If somebody's going to build a house, you tell the builder, hey, look, it's not that much more expensive for us to build this accessible. And you're not just building it for you, but the resale value is going to be even more because you've now added this extra value to it. So it's really educating the builders.
One of the things that was very encouraging for me too, several years ago, I can't remember if it was Seattle or King County Public Housing, but the person that was in charge of the construction on that was a huge advocate of universal design, because he says when they build public housing, they look at a 25 to a 50-year life cycle on that house. So if it's built in universal design, they're actually saving money down the long term. And he said, I'd like to look at housing on a 100-year basis, so we can build to the future. That's what we need to start doing in private housing as well.
No, I mean, getting the public involved, because we are really the loudest
How do
voice.
we get them to ask?
How do we get to, exactly, and what I always joke about that people use the big stall in the bathroom. I mean, the big stall in the bathroom, I love the fact that I can use it because of what the Americans with Disabilities Act says, that they have to have an extra wide stall. Everybody goes there first. Why? Not because they want to offend me and use my stall, because it's not mine. I can just use it as well. But it's got the extra space and your knees aren't touching the door, and you've got room to breathe while you're in there. Well, that's just universally designed.
And it's usually the accessible apartments that go first.
And that's exactly right. And what ends up happening is the accessible apartments that, because of the Fair Housing Act, said that they have to have so many accessible apartments. They've had no way to advertise those apartments to people who actually need them that have disabilities. So the majority of those apartments or condos are probably lived in by people who don't have the specific need for it. And then when they go up for sale, there hasn't, to this point, been a way for people to get the information to know that they were then available. So that's part of that cycle, is that now that people are starting to be aware, hey, we can look for this stuff. We're hoping that it backtracks itself, so the builders realize, well, oh my gosh, people are looking for accessibility. Condo life might be what you're looking for because the condo's got an elevator, and for the most part, the Fair Housing Act says you have to be able to access the building. So it's really public awareness, and then the voice of the group of us together saying, hey, we want this.
Yeah, it was what can we do to increase the awareness of accessible housing and help drive that demand. And I've said there's a couple of things that we're doing. I've always said trends tend to start from the top and work down. They don't go from the bottom and work up. So that's why you're seeing a lot of the high-end houses with European showers or elevators, and so those trends can drive down. I mean, they're saying that there's effective ways of doing, like an elevator. You don't have to buy a house with an elevator in it, but if you've got closets that are stacked on top of each other, at some point in time, that can be an elevator shaft. So it's inexpensive to build a house that way, just in framing. But it's really driving demand. I mean, it's the country moves on the dollar. So if you start using your leverage in economics and where you spend your money, the country will kind of slowly follow suit. Yeah.
So the question is, if somebody's got a disability and they're bidding against people who don't to get an accessible house, legally, because of the Fair Housing Act, we are not allowed to steer. A seller can't legally sell a house to somebody with a disability because that home has accessibility features. It's not legal. It's against the law for us for somebody to do that because of the Fair Housing Act. That said, sellers can sell a house to whoever they want because that may be the best offer. So it's about putting that offer together properly and making sure that there's a letter written,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and some brokers believe in letters, and they call them love letters sometimes,
Mm-hmm.
and some brokers don't, that says, hey, you know, we really want your house, and the reason why we want your house is because we know that it has accessibility features that will fit our lifestyle. And then it's up to the seller. As the realtor, we really legally aren't, you know, able to get in the middle of that.
Well, there's a lot of ways. I mean, you know, having been in the business 17 years, there's a lot besides money
That's right.
that you compete with on a house.
Yeah.
There's terms, there's conditions, there's everything. You know, money can be a minor part of it for some people. One of the things that I always tend to do is I talk to the selling broker every time I've got an offer on a house, and I ask them, you know, what is it that your sellers are looking for? You know, what would they like to see, you know, for an offer, or, you know, are they looking for in a buyer? And like Barry said, you know, writing a love letter, I have no hesitancy to do that. I mean, I can't write it for them, but I can certainly encourage them to, you know, write a letter. Say, we love your house. This is why we love it and why we really like to be there.
And we've been in transactions, which is fantastic, that there was a house on the market, had been on the market for 100+ days. It hadn't sold. It had the most beautiful accessibility features built in, and they built the house for somebody who needed accessibility. We took over the listing, you know, when that had canceled. We listed it, highlighted all of the accessibility features. A family drove over to take a look at it because their agent had just sent them what Tom was talking about, the actual accessibility features of the house, but not the home itself. And they'd been driving by the house the entire time it was for sale and never looked at it because they didn't know it had accessibility features. They were just about ready to take over care of his, you know, adult disabled son, and it just worked perfect. And the woman who was selling it was in tears, and they were in tears, and it was just a perfect, you know, it all worked out the way that it was supposed to.
Yeah.
And what was really funny about that was that they did write a love letter, but our client actually didn't read it. Because it was a great offer, and they called and said, what is your client looking for? And we let them know. They ended up, it just worked out. So there are definitely ways. It's just one of those things that you have to navigate it properly.
Mm-hmm.
Somebody's got a realtor and they want to sell their house that has accessibility features. You know, how does their realtor learn what we've been talking about? They can reach out to us at any time. You know, Tom or I, just come to ableenvironments.com and shoot us a note, have the realtor reach out to us. We'll share the form, we'll teach them how to use it. You know, it's, once they get into the system and know that it's there, it's relatively self-explanatory. We've tried to do a good job of making it kind of ABC and very easy to navigate. But yeah, we're here to help. That's what we want to do. And the beauty is that if that realtor, if their realtor then, you know, becomes an expert in this, then we'll refer people to them, you know, as well. We want this to be a team approach. This isn't something that Tom and I want to own because it's way too big. This is something we want to share with everybody. So if somebody's got a realtor, have them reach out to us and we'll share it with them.
And that's the greatest learning opportunity for us. You know, in fact, a lot of times, like we say, we look for these houses every day, and when we find a house that's just a beautiful example of that, and they may have marked some of the disability features, but they haven't filled out the supplement form, we'll call them up and say, you know, great house, are you familiar with the form? And if you're not, we'll walk through them with it and say, you know, this is what we're looking for on these forms, so fill this out and do this. And it's a matter of, like we said, trying to match the person with the house so that they can find each other.
I've actually gone and met realtors at their houses and walked them through it, just so they, you know, they do it right, you know, which is great because now they're allies of ours, and we've become friends with this nice network of realtors that, you know what they're doing. Yeah, have we? The question is, have we, you know, found companies that help with accessibility upgrades, you know, and feature upgrades, things like that? Yeah, we do. We actually have a designer. Carly Hokie is her name, and she's just been fantastic at getting in and looking at the design of, you know, the interior. There's a company called Pathways Construction and Design Construction in Seattle. There's several different, you know, organizations locally that will come in it's an assessment. You're going to pay to have them come in and assess the home, and then, take what it is that they've put in front of you and do with, do with it what you want. And we're learning there's more remodelers than there are builders that are really focusing on accessibility, is what we found. The builders are very set in their ways for the most part. We've met a couple now that have met with us that are willing and interested in learning more about the universal design side of things. But we found that more remodelers are doing it. They look at a bathroom, and I'll get a phone call from a remodeler that says, hey, I've got this bathroom and I want to make it accessible. What do I need to do? Well, here's what I know, but here, go talk to Carly.
Speaking of which, that's talking with your dollars. If you look at the real estate industry, a huge percentage of the remodeling industry is modifying homes for aging in place and accessibility. So they're not building them that way, but the remodels are cashing in on changing them. And there are some good certifications too. The National Association of Home Builders, for example, has they train some of their builders and remodelers on certified aging in place specialists, where they actually have training on, how to work with older clients and what accessibility means for those, how to design a house for living in place for a longer period of time.
Mm-hmm. Is there anything like the MLS for rentals? Right now, it depends.
It's hit and miss.
Yeah, some of the websites say that they do. They're actually in the MLS now.
Yeah.
There is a rental side that they're slowly starting to build up.
It's a small percentage of the rental market, though. It's usually Open Door and Zillow and some of the big companies. But we've actually met with Zillow and talked about that as well. And interestingly, Airbnb is one of the companies that's ahead of the curve on that.
Yeah, they came to us and partnered up. We actually gave them quite a bit of the information that they're using now for their accessibility, because it becomes really important when you're booking a vacation that place is as accessible as you need it to be. The other thing about rentals is that the Fair Housing Act and the ADA, and I believe it's more under the Fair Housing Act, that if somebody needs accessibility upgrades done for a rental, that they have the right to have those upgrades done to a rental, knowing that when they move out, they need to be removed. But a landlord can't say no to upgrading a rental unit for accessibility features, just knowing that when you move out, you're going to have to take it with you. But they can't say no, you can't put grab bars in, or you can't do these things. It's against the law for them to say no to that. Do real estate agents ever have portable ramps? I carry them in my trunk.
I've certainly done that. When I had a person relocating from Texas, and we got a set of ramps to carry around. In fact, one of the things that we've talked about doing is actually working with some of the mobility companies.
Yeah, Kersey Mobility I've talked to about actually being able to get one of their vans. So if we need to take clients out and show them a place, we can get an accessible van and use that. If somebody's flying in from out of town, or if they don't have transportation themselves, then we can go pick them up, and take them to show houses. So the question is, what can we do for folks that have fewer resources to be able to either remodel or get into their home and own their own home? There's a few things. So one is the Northwest Access Fund actually has a home improvement loan, super low interest. They're fantastic. And I believe it's up to $35,000 that somebody who wants accessibility upgrades done to their home can apply through the Northwest Access Fund. You can go right to their website. They've been fantastic. There are some remodel loans that are out there. Was it the 401 or the I said 401k. Can't what?
Yeah.
Sorry, I screwed it up by saying it. If I hadn't messed you up. But there are remodel loans, so you can actually buy a house with a loan, knowing that the value of the home will be a certain point when it's been remodeled. So you can come in with you're going to get a loan for a little bit more than what it is that you're going to pay for the house to remodel it. So when it gets appraised at that final value.
It's a 403k.
403k.
Yeah, and actually the nice thing about that is that FHA, that's an FHA loan. FHA actually will handle the construction too. They're the ones that make the progress payments. They're the ones that approve the building. So you don't have to end up being a project manager, which, believe me, if you haven't done that, you don't want to do it. It's a lot of work.
Another thing, back to the Northwest Access Fund, they do credit counseling, and I've actually gone through some of it with myself, that will help you get yourself in a situation where you have more of an opportunity to then get a loan. People, rent is expensive, and sometimes it's actually, it's more beneficial to look at actually buying than it is renting, because renting, you're giving somebody else your money, and buying, you're building into your own equity. So
it's a fixed cost.
people get really, really nervous about buying because of, the cost, yet in the end, that could save you money. So, having somebody like the Northwest Access Fund take a look at your credit and how things are all set up, and then taking that next step into, getting a mortgage broker. And both Tom and I have fantastic mortgage brokers that we work with that will help somebody, look at what realistically they need to do to get themselves ready to buy, because you might not be able to buy right away, but by putting a plan in place, then you're lining yourself up to be able to do it later.
And there are private organizations out there that do have loans too. So I mean, it's really a matter of finding out what someone's needs are and doing the research.
So there are options available, absolutely.
I would just say, if you've got any individual questions or anything else, don't ever hesitate to reach out to Barry and I. I mean, Barry loves to talk.
Yeah, okay. There's going to be comments in the chat over there.